Tonight on EWTN Live, we'll take a special look back in history at the Crusades and try to separate fact from fiction to learn about what the Crusaders did and why. So please stay with us. Thank you very much and welcome. I'm Father Mitch and welcome to EWTN Live, which is our chance to bring you guests from all over the world. And they've done that tonight. Our guests are collaborators on a special EWTN mini-series on the Crusades, debuting tonight, right after this show at 10 p.m. Eastern Time. It was shot on location in 7 different countries. It details the history of the Crusades and how the church responded to the Muslim attacks. So please welcome Professor of History and Director of the Center for Medieval and Renaissance Studies at St. Louis University and the author of the book, The Concise History of the Crusades, Professor Thomas F. Madden, as well as the writer, producer, and host of the Crusades miniseries, Mr. Stefano Mazzeo. Stefano, Professor Madden. First, I want to thank you both for being here and for making this series. I was able to take a look at it last week. And it's an important issue. There's a certain timeliness because of the recent interest in the Middle East, to be sure, and the conflicts taking place. But there's also a much longer history of, especially since I'd say the Enlightenment period, the 1700s, that have seen the Crusades in very, very negative light. Why, Mr. Mazzeo, why did you do this series and propose this?
Well, first off, about 2 years ago, I think EWTN wanted to do something on the Crusades. And they contacted me about 18 months ago and said, would you produce this and write it? And I said, yes, okay, fine. And that's what I've been doing for the last 18 months, working on this project. So
that's one thing, but, you know, it's not just something that somebody says, okay, we want to do this work. And you've been confronted before with negative images of the Crusades back in your own home of England.
Yes, of course. In Britain, we have the BBC, and they make programs about Catholic history that aren't necessarily true. And they made something on the Crusades about 3 years ago, which I felt was not fair. And it cherry-picked certain incidents. And what we wanted to do more than anything was tell the truth about the Crusades. And I think once you start to look at the truth, of not a very different picture appears, but a different picture appears.
As a matter of fact, I think I saw that on our History channel. And as I recall, it was filled with a lot of snide comments rather than a serious examination of history. That was the way it came across to me.
Well, it tried very hard to seem like a serious history, but I think they did a lot of silly bits. They're not necessarily untrue, it's just that it gave a false picture of the whole crusading era. It didn't tell the true story of what happened and how long it was going on for. You know, they tried to sort of concentrate the Crusades at 200 years in the Holy Land only, but it was more than that. It was a long, long struggle from the time of, or virtually from the time when Muhammad founded Islam, right the way through to the end of the Ottoman Empire, really. There was trouble.
See, this is one of the things, Professor Madden, that a lot of folks don't realize. One of the major non-Christian areas that the Muslims conquered was Persia. But pretty much everywhere outside of Arabia were Christian countries that they conquered.
Yeah, that's right. When the Islamic forces first came out of Arabia, they were conquering what we today tend to think of as the periphery of Christianity, the Palestine, Syria, where we have very small Christian populations, Egypt. But when these invasions occurred in the 7th century, this was the core of Christianity. This is where you could find the most Christians. Antioch, where they were first called Christians, Jerusalem, where the religion began, Alexandria, and Egypt, where monasticism was born.
What we now call Iraq, then Mesopotamia, was filled with Christians who were descendants of the old Babylonians and Assyrians.
Right.
And you can go still to the Holy Land and see the ruins of churches, not destroyed by the Muslims, but destroyed by the Persians before the Muslims got there. But let's give a sense of this. I want to show a little clip from the video that you did and just give a graphic about what we mean by this rise of Islam and the reason for the Crusades. Let's take a look at it.
In 610, something was to happen that would affect the whole of the Christian world. Islam, which means submission to God, was founded by Muhammad when he claimed to have had revelations from Allah. Muslim expansion was fairly rapid, and before the death of Muhammad, they had already conquered much of the Arabian Peninsula.
The expansion, therefore, of the Islamic world was very quick, and it was all by the sword. It was all military expansion. It's very different than Christians tend to think of the expansion of Christianity as being led by missionaries going into, say, the New World, or in the ancient world, the Christian missionaries that spread out all over the Roman Empire, like St. Paul.
By 640, Islam had not only conquered the whole of Arabia, but also the Holy Land. In 661, the Muslim conquest of Persia was virtually complete, and they had occupied the Christian lands of North Africa to Tripoli. In the early 8th century, Islam was pushing the Byzantines back in Asia Minor, then captured the whole of North Africa. By 732, Islam had conquered most of the Iberian Peninsula and was pushing up into France.
People often think that the Crusades were unprovoked wars against the Muslim world. In fact, the Crusades were the end result of several centuries of wars of Muslims against the Christian lands. And in fact, by the time the Crusades had been called in 1095, about 2/3 of the old Christian world had already been conquered. And so at some point, Christianity, either as a religion or as a culture, had to defend itself against those continued invasions, or else be subsumed as Eastern Christendom had been.
One of the points of it is to show this graphic of how the Arab Muslims left Arabia almost a year or two after Muhammad died. He died in June of 632. And they went all across North Africa, which was all Christian. and then into Spain and into France. And they also went east into Mesopotamia, Syria, Palestine, and they also got into Persia, which was not a Christian country, but everywhere else was.
Right.
So I think one of the points that your video makes is the incredible pressure this was putting on the Christian world from both East and West.
Yes, I found it very important to actually show visually what was happening. So we created this map and animated it, showing how we used green for a color, how it expanded right across North Africa and into Spain. Spain and Portugal was pretty well completely conquered. And the first reversal wasn't until the Battle of Tours, which is actually in Tours in mid-France by Charles Martel. It wasn't until 732 until the first reversal happened. So
it's exactly 100 years after Muhammad died.
They were in central France, yeah.
They were in central France.
Yeah.
And Professor, how did people in Europe and in the Eastern Empire, react to all this?
Well, particularly in the Eastern Empire, they were very surprised by it. This had come just after a very exhausting war between the Greek Christians, the Byzantine Empire, and then the Persian Empire.
Who were the two superpowers of the time.
Exactly, and that's really why the Arabs had been so successful. Arabs had over the centuries often hit up against the borders of the Roman Empire, but this was the first time that they'd been able to break through. They also took advantage of various frictions between the Christians themselves in the Eastern Mediterranean. There was a lot of fighting between people who were called Monophysite heresy against the Orthodox view. And so they took advantage of that as well, and that weakened the Christians in that region.
And it's also a law in Islam, because in traditional Islam, Muhammad, it's written in the Quran that Christians and Jews are people of the book, Ahl Kitab, and they are not forced to convert. They can pay a tax called jizya. And in Egypt, the tax was lower than the Byzantine taxes. Right. So they're acting like a bunch of Republicans looking for lower taxes.
Right. Yeah. Right. And they wouldn't be, particularly the Monophysites, they wouldn't be persecuted, which they were persecuted under the Byzantines.
Right.
So, because for the Muslims, it didn't matter what kind of Christian you were. Right. If you were a Christian, then you're a Christian. That's fine.
And also, that's the background, but what becomes key, the Christians in Western Europe don't feel any urge to go to the Orient. They're just trying to protect their own countries of, France, which was not really a country. It was all these small duchies and such. But they're trying to protect Western Europe from Muslim invasions. But they didn't care about the Holy Land as such in the first, couple hundred years.
It was a very bad time to be in Europe at that point. In the 8th century, the 9th century, the 10th centuries were very, very difficult times in Europe. They had repeated invasions by non-Christian groups who...
The Norsemen.
The Norse.
The Magyars.
Magyars, and ultimately Muslims. Yeah. And so it was very destructive. For most people in Europe at that time, for most Catholics in Europe, it was very hard to see much beyond a 5-mile radius. You were really concerned about how you were going to eat and how you're going to defend your family.
That's it.
It really wouldn't be until the 11th century when Europe began to put itself back together again.
Converting the Magyars and the Norsemen.
That's right. That's exactly right. And then they were able to then kind of lift their head above the clouds again and look around to see what was going on. And then they could see that the world had changed quite a lot. And also because of the recent, with the arrival of the Turks in the 11th century, there was a new, very powerful, very deadly Muslim group that was attacking Christians again, which is what led ultimately to the Crusades.
Yeah, I think, again, one of the points people don't know in that history is that at first the Umayyads, who were the ones at the Eastern Empire of Muslims, they were pretty benign towards Christians. Pay your jizya tax, you're okay. But the Fatimids of Egypt and the Abbasids of Baghdad, they became more aggressive, and then the Seljuk Turks.
Seljuk Turks, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the Fatimids destroyed the Church of the Holy Sepulchre.
Exactly.
So it's,
In 1009.
That's right.
Hakim. Until his mother told him to stop. Did you know that? His mother told him, you better stop that. I had a bad dream about this.
Yeah, there's always a mother involved in these stories. Yeah.
Having a good influence on a bad boy.
That's right.
Now, so this is one of the things that you bring out in the film. This is a new kind of energy in the 1000s that was moving into the Byzantine Empire even further, coming up to Constantinople.
Yes, after the Battle of Manzikert, the Seljuk Turks pushed right into Asia Minor, right up to the walls of Constantinople almost. So at that point, the Byzantine Empire in 1095 issues a call, and the only person to issue a call to at that time was the Pope. So he appealed to Western Europe, and the Pope Urban II, then thought about it, prayed a lot about it. At the time he was at Piacenza in northern Italy. He said to his nobles there in the court, do some of you want to go? And he thought about it longer. Then he went over the Alps into France, and then at Clermont, after much prayer, he issued the call.
And one of the other important things about Pope Urban's call for the crusade is that right before it, I mean, in 1054, there'd been this split between East and West, but he repaired that first. There was reconciliation with the Patriarch and the Emperor and the Synod of Bishops in Constantinople. So that was a very important step that he took first before calling a crusade.
Yeah, and the call for the crusade is largely predicated on the idea that we are coming to help the Greek Christians, the Christians in the East. We are one church,
right.
And when you're harmed, we're harmed as well. And so that idea of wanting, as an act of charity and as an act of love of neighbor, you'd want to go and to help these Christians in the East who are being attacked by, the only reason is their religion.
Mm-hmm. And of course, we can't forget that at the same period, the struggle for regaining Spain back for the Christian inhabitants was still going on. So that stays going on until 1492. Mm-hmm. But this new move to the east takes place when? When did that get started?
Well, the Pope actually said to the Iberians, stay in Spain and Portugal, don't go on this crusade. He actually said, stay where you are, to them. It was the Franks mainly who went on this crusade.
And again, so folks understand, the Franks are the barbarian tribe that invaded Gaul, the Roman province of Gaul.
Well, they were barbarian before Christians, before they became Christian.
Like everybody else down there.
Yes, indeed.
They were all barbarians, and the Franks were a particular tribe of barbarians that prospered and did well, became France, but that they were the bulk.
I think it's important to realize too that they were actually volunteers. They weren't being paid to go on a crusade. They were doing it because of their love of Christianity. They could see pilgrims being massacred on their way.
Matter of fact, we have a story of one of the pilgrimage, a very large pilgrimage of Germans had gone to the Holy Land. Let's take a look at that clip, see if it's ready.
Pilgrims to the Holy Land before the First Crusade were usually unarmed and peaceful, but they were being attacked and robbed. One German pilgrimage in 1064 lost over 2/3 of its number between the coast and Jerusalem. Of 7,000 pilgrims, only 2,000 returned home.
Well, God is just. He is justice itself. So God, therefore, can never want injustice to be done to anybody, and therefore he gives people the right to defend themselves against injustice, whether it's a private individual who was attacked in the street would have the right to defend himself by using force, or a country which was attacked by another country has the right to defend and vindicate itself.
One of the first to step forward and commit to the cause was Adhemar, Bishop of Le Puy. He was made Urban's papal legate, the expedition's spiritual leader. As the Pope's call spread across Europe, people of every class stepped forward to take the cross. Some of the most important nobles of Christendom came forward to lead and fund what was to become an armed pilgrimage.
The unusual thing about Crusades were that they were penitential wars, which is to say that the Crusaders were believed to be actually fighting as acts of penance. Now, you do not take on a penance because you are told to. Of course, your confessor might tell you to put it, but in the end, you yourself have to decide to take on a penance. And that meant that Crusaders, unlike the participants in any other kind of war, were volunteers.
And they were in part responding to this one slaughter of almost 7,000 German pilgrims?
Yes, well, 7,000 German pilgrims went on a pilgrimage, but between the coast and Jerusalem.
It wasn't a crusade, it was just...
No, it was a pilgrimage.
Just a pilgrimage.
Just an ordinary pilgrimage,
to the Holy Land.
unarmed, between the coast and Jerusalem and back again. They lost 2/3 of their people being killed on the way, basically. Yeah. So it was that happened 20 years before the Crusades actually were called, but there was a background of pilgrims being killed. Yeah. There was the Byzantine emperor losing his land, his call. So there was a build-up of all this tension. And you have to remember, at the time when the Crusades were called in 1095, Christendom had lost 2/3 of its land. It was at that point, Christendom had to stand up and say, enough is enough. We just have to do something about this. Right. We can no longer take it, you know. Otherwise, as Professor Madden says in the actual film, he says, you know, at one point we have to make a stand, otherwise we'll be subsumed, just like Eastern Christendom had been.
Right, right.
With regards to the volunteer aspect of the Crusades, you often hear today a kind of a common image or a common trope about a crusader who is essentially an adventurer. He's someone who wants to carve out a kingdom for himself somewhere.
A younger son who can't inherit the castle,
exactly.
So he wants to make his own.
Yeah, exactly. And his scholars today now know that that is completely false. That the people who went on crusade, first of all, it was extremely expensive. It was extremely dangerous. Many nobles impoverished themselves by going on crusades. They did it, if all they wanted was booty, which crusades were terrible for booty, by the way. But if all they wanted was booty, they could have done it very close to home. There were plenty of places to go and conquer. But instead, this is the only time I know of in history in which you have thousands of people marching thousands of miles deep into enemy territory for no good strategic reason. The reason that they're there is a devotional reason. They're there because they want to do something that is good, because they are themselves intently sinful people. They know how much they're sinful, and they know that they need a great deal of penance to pay for those sins. These are professional warriors. They live their life by the sword, and they know they have a hard row to hoe to get into heaven. Yeah. That's what's leading them there.
And one of the things that also strikes me about, especially the first crusade that began in 1095, is that on one hand, the Crusaders were focused on getting to Jerusalem, but the Byzantine emperor was focused on getting the Seljuk Turks out of his kingdom.
That's right.
That caused some tension between the Crusaders and the emperor, did it not?
Yes, absolutely. Once they had conquered Nicaea back, then the Emperor Alexius returned to Constantinople, and the Crusaders went forward. Alexius was supposed to meet them at Antioch, but then, as it happens, he came halfway and then turned around because he thought that the war was hopeless and that they were all going to be massacred. And so, as a result of that, he didn't play a part in that crusade any longer, and the rest of the Crusaders marched all the way to Jerusalem. Alexius always felt that he had been a bait and switch kind of situation, that he had not gotten everything back that he was supposed to get back. And so it was always a sore point.
But also the Crusaders sort of thought, of the emperor, that he was kind of wimpy in not going all the way forward.
Exactly. And they also felt they needed his help. They were counting on his help. And when he turned around, they said, whatever oaths we have made to this man, we want nothing to do with him.
We can't trust him, so we're doing our own thing.
Yes, when they turned up in Constantinople, they expected the emperor would supply an army as well, and also lead them. They expected he would be a leader, provide supplies, and provide an army as well, as much as what the Christians would supply. Because remember, Constantinople at that time was the biggest city in Christendom, and they thought that once they got to Constantinople, everything would be fine, because then the emperor would come on board, he would lead them, they'd have a huge army. It didn't happen. The emperor didn't come. He was at Nicaea, he helped at Nicaea, but after Nicaea, he disappeared.
Yeah.
One of the ironic things about the Crusades is that they were created to help the Greek and the other Eastern Christians, but particularly in the case of the Catholics and the Greek Orthodox, over time the Crusades actually drove them further and further apart.
Yes, especially the Fourth Crusade. Mm-hmm. But before we get to that, I don't think we have a chance. So we have to watch this series. Yeah. But one of the things I'd like to deal with that you bring up in the video is a number of modern people will assert that once the Crusaders got to Jerusalem, they just went in there, killed everybody. They massacred every Muslim, every Jew, even the Eastern Christians there. Just went into a blood frenzy and wiped them all out. And you say no.
No, this is a huge exaggeration, and it's been growing recently, but a long time it's taken to grow to the state where even I've heard people say that, once the Crusaders got into Jerusalem, they killed absolutely everyone and then said mass amongst the corpses. Now that's shocking, and it didn't happen. What actually happened was a siege in the medieval time was sort of a psychological warfare, whereby if a city surrendered, usually the defenders were released, set free or ransomed. If they held out, and they were holding out in Jerusalem because they expected a relief army, the Muslims expected a relief army from Egypt to arrive, so they held out. So once the Crusaders broke through, there was a bit of a massacre, but most of it was actually fighting people. They were soldiers that were killed. There were a few civilians that got in the way as well. But as Professor Phillips, another one of our professors, says, it's an exaggeration. It's they're quoting actually when the people write the chronicles at the time and today, they're quoting Revelations, which says that they were walking in blood up to their bridles, which is impossible because Jerusalem's on a hill anyway, I mean, it is impossible, but there were lots of survivors. I mean, it's just an exaggeration.
Does that meet your research as well?
Yeah, there's been a lot of research on the massacre in 1099 at Jerusalem. One of the great Crusade scholars, an Israeli, Benjamin Kedar, has looked at all of the sources, both Muslim, Jewish, and Christian for it, and he's concluded that the majority of the people in the city were not killed. There were some who were killed. Most of those were soldiers who were killed on the Temple Mount, where they had all fled. But we know that there were a lot of people who were not killed because they were the ones who were helping to clean up the city afterwards. And also we know a lot of Jews were not killed because they went to Alexandria and they were writing to relatives in Alexandria, and so we have those documents. So we know much more
so
about
there's
it.
actual documentary evidence
That's right.
that this Israeli scholar has brought out,
Right.
saying that the Jewish community was not wiped out in Jerusalem.
That's right.
But they were because they were sending letters.
Right.
Dead men don't write letters.
Right. It's a war, and so
Unless you're Shirley MacLaine.
yeah, people are getting killed. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah.
But it is not. What we hear today frequently is that the streets of Jerusalem ran red with blood to various levels, when in fact it's absolutely absurd. It's impossible. The chronicles that refer to that are these are chronicles that are being written back in Europe by monks, and what they're doing is
So they weren't eyewitnesses.
no, none of these are eyewitnesses. What they're doing is they're either using something from a phrase from the Bible to try to make the point that Jerusalem was cleansed. Or they're just using figures of speech. So for today, if I say, don't make a mountain out of a molehill, I don't actually mean anything about mountains or molehills.
Or if I said millions of people died,
Right.
And that doesn't always mean millions, it means a lot.
Right.
And so they were using biblical images to paint a picture that they never witnessed.
That's right, yeah.
But we're in Europe hearing about and making a good story better.
Right.
Yeah.
That's it. They were quoting Revelations, really. Yeah.
Well, we've got to make this story come to a break. We're going to come back in about 2 minutes because we want to get your calls, your questions, as well as those of our studio audience. So please stay with us. Thank you very much. And first I want to invite all of you to do what these nice folks have done. We have a big group of folks from the Republic of Texas, plus some other folks scattered around from other parts of the country. And we'd love to have you come and join us too. If you can make a pilgrimage, please contact our pilgrimage department. Make sure that there's enough seats and all that. Their number is 205-271-2966, or you go to the website EWTN.com and they'll give you information about the scheduling of masses, programs, tours of the studios, places to stay, directions up to Hanceville to see the shrine of the Most Blessed Sacrament and all that. So we strongly urge you to come on down and join us because it's a lot of fun with having all these folks here. We'd like to see you too. You ready for some questions?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Giddy up. Let's start off with Joseph. Hello, Joseph.
Hi, Father Mitch. How are you?
Fine. Where are you from?
I'm from Boise, Idaho.
Oh, that's a nice town. I was over there not too long ago.
Yeah, I met you.
Oh, good. Do I owe you money?
No, you just shook my hand.
All right. I don't think I do. So go ahead with your question.
My question is that in school, I learned that the Crusades were a complete and utter failure, and I was wondering whether I should debate that or not.
Good. Well, let's start off with debating with these two gentlemen. Dr. Madden.
It depends on what you mean by a failure or a success. As far as the original military goals of preserving Jerusalem and pushing back the Muslim advance, ultimately in that although they had some limited successes, they failed. But as far as a devotional practice, one in which the Christians were trying to purify themselves by doing these acts of charity, it was very much a success. And I would also argue that centuries of crusades also, first to try to restore the lands that had been lost, but then also by the 15th century, crusades are all being waged to defend Europe itself. Those
because
also,
in the 15th century, there were attacks from the Turks.
From the Ottoman Turks.
The Ottoman Turks.
They're coming into Europe now. And by that time, now most of those failed too, but centuries of crusading, though, slowed the Muslim advance down, I believe. And it slowed it down enough so that Europe was able to, I think, just barely, but it was able to survive as a Christian area. And it was able to survive long enough to the point where the scientific revolution and the age of exploration allowed it to survive indefinitely.
As a matter of fact, I would wonder, on one hand, the last of the great Muslim attacks on Europe was from the Ottoman Turks.
Right.
Mm-hmm. They conquered the lands the Arabs had. They conquered the Arab Muslims, sure. Even though they were Muslim too. But then they took Constantinople. They were going into Hungary. Mm-hmm. They were raiding Italy and elsewhere. But eventually they did get stopped. And by 1673, at the gates of
Vienna.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say that there were two answers to that question. One was a failure to retake North Africa, former Christian lands, failure to retake the Holy Land and Asia Minor, but it was successful in some very important areas, and that was pushing the Ottoman Turks back in Eastern and Central Europe. Because if they had captured Vienna, the whole of Northern Europe lay open. Yeah. And they were also very successful in the reconquista of Spain and Portugal, because at the very year that the Moors were pushed out of Spain and Portugal, 1492 was the year that America was discovered. So if Iberia was left in Muslim hands,
which is Spain and Portugal,
Spain and Portugal, then who knows, perhaps the new world, America, would have been discovered by Muslims, and everyone here would be Muslim now, not Christian. But God in his providence didn't want that. Yeah.
And I think here's one of the things I would also say to his question. It was the Muslims that were eating up the Christian countries. And in one sense, you can say that failed.
That failed, yeah.
That the Christians eventually stopped them. And then as time went on, right after that defeat in Vienna, Peter the Great in Russia starts to take back land in the East. And the Russians keep doing that. And then the French and the Italians, the English, they all retake North Africa from the Ottoman Turks. They're still Muslim, but they're not Ottoman Turk. So in one sense, it may be also that the Muslim attempt to take over Christian Europe is what failed, as did the attempt of the Christians to take over the Middle East.
Oh, they wanted Europe. They talked about it, didn't they?
They still do.
Sure, yeah. They wanted Europe.
Sultan Mehmed II, who captured Constantinople, made it very clear that his plan was to, as he put it, unite the elder sister with the younger sister. In other words, to take Rome. And in fact, had he lived just a few more years, he could very well have done it. He landed an attack on Italy in 1480 at Otranto, captured the city of Otranto, and
executed the Christians.
That's right. And then they were preparing for a complete capture of Italy. And there was almost no resistance. In Rome, people were packing their bags to get out. So had he lived, as it turns out, he died, and the whole thing was called off. But had he lived a few more years, it's hard to see how Italy would have avoided being conquered by the Turks.
And even at the time of the Battle of Lepanto, the Sultan of Istanbul had sworn an oath that he was going to make St. Peter's Basilica into a mosque.
Like Hagia Sophia, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. No, I think it's in God's providence that Muhammad II died, you know, and also Pius V called on the whole of Europe to pray the Rosary before the Battle of Lepanto, and it may not have turned the tide completely, but it certainly gave Europe confidence that they could take on the Ottoman Turks and they could beat themselves. And they could defend themselves. So it gave them a lot of a boost, a big boost.
So it's important for people to understand that the Battle of Lepanto, they weren't trying to conquer Turkey. The Turks were trying to conquer Italy. Yeah. You know, this was a defensive. Yeah,
it was a defensive war, and the Christian fleet was kind of like 2/3 of that of the Turks. So the Turks had a huge fleet, much bigger than the Christians, and yet the Christian fleet won. And so.
Let's take a question from our studio. Sir, where are you from?
Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Great, good to have you here. Any question?
Well, it seems like Islam is a true imperialist religion, and that Christians even today are nothing but sacrificial lambs before it. We don't seem to have any ideas on how to fight back. Perhaps it's like St. Francis would rather convert them than fight against them. But do you have any idea over the almost 1,400 years how many Christians have actually died at the hands of the Muslims?
Either of you have any of that?
Well, I think that's a very difficult question to answer because we simply don't know how many Christians died, but obviously a lot did. I mean, you know, that pilgrimage we talked about earlier, whereby 2/3 of the Christian pilgrims died, the German pilgrimage.
2/3 of 7,000?
Of 7,000, yeah. So I don't know whether we could use that as a rule of thumb or not. I can't say, but obviously a lot of Christians did die. Yeah.
At the University of Hawaii, on their website, they assert that in the Crusades to the Middle East, about 1 million people on both sides died. Does that sound about right to you?
Doesn't sound even close.
No?
I don't think you couldn't kill 1 million people in the Middle Ages in the Holy Land that fast if you tried. 1 million is the type of...
Which they did.
Yes. 1 million is the sort of death tolls we get in the modern age where we can kill with industrial efficiency. The Middle Ages didn't have anything like that. I cannot imagine if we think of just the main 2 centuries of crusading, let's say from 1095 to 1291, there's simply no way that 1 million people died in any way through the Crusades. Those are modern figures, and I don't know anyone at the University of Hawaii who could have come up with something like that.
Yeah, certainly when I've read the Muslim chronicles of the Crusades and the Christian chronicles, and you'll hear 12,000 died, sometimes 1,200.
Sometimes you hear 100,000 died, 200,000 died. Now, if you're taking those chronicles at face value, then I could see how you might get those figures. But those numbers, no reputable historian takes those numbers seriously because
it's like our millions.
Yes.
Millions of guys died.
In the Middle Ages, people would count things by 1, 2, 3, 4, 1,000. I mean, they're not actually counting things the way we would from a scientific perspective. They're just coming up with big numbers to mean a lot.
Right. And, you know, sometimes people say, oh, it's these religious wars that are the real big problem in history.
Yeah, that's
But in fact, in the first battle of World War I, 1 million soldiers died in just that one battle in 1 month. And you're saying that 1 million people didn't die in 250 years of crusading.
No, I mean, the massacre that we were just talking about in Jerusalem, the best evidence suggests that about 3,500 people were killed in that. 3,500 people were killed every 3 hours during World War II for 6 straight years, round the clock. Right. So they're not even comparable.
Right.
Yes, the atheists kill a lot better than Crusaders, believe you me. Atheists are, you know, people like Hitler, Stalin. You're looking at 50 million that died in the Second World War.
And with under Stalin, 61.9 million is the figure for them. We have another caller. Hello, Fred. Fred, you there?
Hello?
Hi, where are you from?
I'm from Louisiana.
Great. And your question?
I have two questions. The first is I'm reading Hilaire Belloc's book on the Crusades, and I was wondering how accurate that is. And my second question is from a news show where they had some panelists discussing ISIS and what's going on in the Middle East. And this panelist identified himself as a Catholic and was saying that the Muslims and ISIS need to mature like Christians have, that like in the Crusades, the Pope ordered the killing of innocents, and we wouldn't do that today. And I'm convinced the Pope didn't do that, and I'm sure he had very little to do with, the actual battles in the Crusades. So I'll just hang up and listen for your answer.
Thank you. Appreciate that, Fred. First of all, did Pope Urban order the Crusaders to kill innocent people?
No. No Pope.
Any evidence of that?
No.
There's
How
no
about his
evidence of that.
successors?
No. We don't know precisely what he said at Clermont, but we do have his letters that he wrote afterwards. He says nothing of the sort. I've read all of the papal encyclicals that called subsequent crusades. No pope says anything like that. What they call the Crusaders to do is to go and right these wrongs, to go there, to come to the aid of their Christian brothers and sisters in the East, and also to restore the body of Christ. They'll use imagery in that way also.
Also, when in the Fourth Crusade, when the Crusaders did take Constantinople and sack it, the Pope was happy about this?
No, he was very upset. He had already excommunicated the crusade. This crusade had disobeyed him several times. That's the problem with anything that human beings do. Sometimes things go awry. The Fourth Crusade certainly went awry, but they had repeatedly disobeyed his orders, and so he excommunicated the crusade.
So he didn't encourage them to sack the city,
no,
kill innocent people.
In fact, he had sent several letters absolutely forbidding them to attack Constantinople, which was not exactly innocent people in any case, but they were Christian, and that was why he forbade them to attack. He said, your job is to avenge the injuries of Christ, not to attack Christians, no matter what they say about me as the Pope or any other Christians in the West.
Yes, I think it's also important to realize that a crusade was only allowed to reclaim Christian lands. They weren't allowed to go into new territory and conquer by the sword. That wasn't their mission at all. In fact, the way Christianity is spread is by peaceful missionaries, friars and priests going out and preaching, never by the sword. But Islam does use the sword to conquer, and the crusade was really to put that right, to go and take back these lands.
Right. Now, Hilaire Belloc's book, what value is that?
Well, I think it's a very entertaining book, and I think it's also a lot of things that people used to kind of poo-poo with it. Now scholars are starting to come back to it. But it does have, it's very dated, and he doesn't have access to all the materials that modern scholars have now.
So it's a good, maybe a good introductory book,
I think it's perfectly
but
fine.
then get your book to get some more facts.
That's right.
Yes, I agree.
All right, sir, where are you from?
Well, that's Lepanto, Illinois.
Good to have you here. And your question?
My question is, how many crusades were there, and what were the elements to it that triggered all those crusades?
You're going to have to watch the whole series that he did, but go ahead.
There were, historians use different numbers with regards to how many numbers there were. Usually we can all agree on up to number 5. After we get to 6th, 7th, and 8th, we all start kind of disagreeing as to which one is which. But those numbers were just given to the Crusades in the 18th century. Those are not something that they used in the Middle Ages. The fact is, Crusades were going on little by little throughout the period. So there is, if you actually counted them all up, I'm not even sure how you would do it, but there would be a lot of them, hundreds and hundreds of various crusades. Now, there were occasions in which a pope declared a particular, what they used to call a passagium generale, a really big crusade, and those were more rare. Those are ones in which the pope actually declared it, and those kinds of crusades had certain elements that by canon law made them crusades. It had the vow of the cross. It had the privileges of the crusader. It had the plenary dispensation, indulgence that was given to the crusader who met the vow. It had all these various aspects that made it a crusade.
Okay. All right. We have another caller. Hello, Joe.
Hello, how are you, Father?
Fine, thanks. Where are you from?
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Great town. Eat some graters for me. What's your question?
The question is, what role did St. Francis of Assisi play in the Crusades?
Yes.
You portray that in the video series.
Yes, I was very keen on putting St. Francis in the Crusades. And it's surprising how many saints actually took part or were associated with Crusades. So I was very happy to dramatize this piece. We showed St. Francis, who is actually the cameraman's brother.
The actor is.
The actor is.
His brother's not St. Francis.
His brother's not St. Francis.
See, when you say the word actually, I want to find out what you mean.
Yes.
We're dealing with history here.
No, that's true, yes. No, the actor was the cameraman's Michael Benko, who's Slovak. Yeah. I've got to say hello to Michael and Merrick. Hello, Michael and Merrick, because they're watching in Slovakia. That's the director and the cameraman. Now, we actually did dramatize a lot of these sequences. We got some, well, they're all amateur actors actually, and St. Francis is the cameraman's brother. Yeah. So we showed St. Francis. But
was the real St. Francis in the Crusades?
Yes, well, he turned up at the 5th Crusade in Egypt, and he was saddened by the state of the Crusades, and he thought, I could stop this.
What made him so sad about the state of the Crusades?
Well, they had this disease that made the gums rot. For starting, their teeth were falling out. You know, the Crusaders were in a bad state. They were still prepared to fight. So he asked the Crusaders to show him where the Sultan was, and they pointed over to where the lines were, and he walked over into the lines, and at first he was arrested as being a beggar because he was dressed in the rags of a holy man. They didn't realize who he was, and he said, I'm, a brother, can I go and can I see the Sultan, please? So he was shown eventually to see Sultan Al-Kamil, and there's many apocryphal tales about this. One is that he was against the Crusades, but he wasn't. Another one was that he was friendly with Al-Kamil. Well, he tried to convert Al-Kamil. In fact, when St. Francis went into the Muslim camp, he thought, well, I'll either convert them or I'll be martyred. And that's what St. Francis wanted. So we show him there in Al-Kamil's tent with a cross, trying to convert Al-Kamil to Christianity because he thought that was the only way to stop this. Yeah. And I think he was right.
Yeah. But let's take another caller. Hello, Betty.
Hi, Father Pacwa.
Hi, where are you from?
I have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
First of all, I just really enjoy the way that you explain everything to us. It's like a history in Christianity. Now, my question is, what actually made the Muslims want to take over the lands to begin with? And, why did they start taking over the lands? Was it to convert people or just to gain lands? And is there a comparison at all what ISIS is doing now, trying to take over lands and, persecuting the Christians?
Well, I mean, why they wanted to take it over, it was in the way. I mean, they were expanding and building an empire. It might be helpful to understand that by the 7th century, certainly by the late 7th century, in Islamic thought had developed the concept of the Dar al-Islam and the Dar al-Harb, where the world is essentially divided into two spheres, the abode of Islam and the abode of war. And it is the duty of the warriors to expand the abode of Islam and therefore expand to the point where presumably the entire world would become under Islamic law. Now, as you mentioned, Christians and Jews within that framework would be allowed to keep their religion, but they would have to live under Sharia. They'd have to live under Islamic law.
And they were not allowed to have weapons, which is something important for understanding today. The Christians have never been allowed to have weapons to defend themselves against Muslims.
And these wars were considered to be something that was supposed to be the norm. A Ghazi warrior who worked on the frontier was considered a great hero because they were supposed to be the norm. In fact, by Islamic law, they were not allowed to make peace treaties with the Christians. That's right. They could only make truces.
But eventually returned to the war because and I'd say that under the Umayyads, the first group of leaders, they were heavily into trying to get land and an empire and have a good life. But under their successors, the Abbasids and the Fatimids, it became a more religious commitment to pushing Islam on the world. And I think that would be, some of the way that, it changed, and it has changed over time.
Yeah, it's definitely changed.
It's gone back and forth. The Turks were pushing Islam, but they wanted an empire more.
Right.
And they wanted a good life. ISIS wants to push Islam more. And they didn't just want an empire. They want their version of Wahhabi Islam. And that be the difference. We've got to, I'm afraid we've flat out run out of time. Just want to let people know the 4-part miniseries, The Crusades, as well as Professor Madden's book, which is The Concise History of the Crusades, is available at EWTN Religious Catalog, which is EWTNRC.com, or call them at 1-800-854-6316. Thank you both, and may the Lord bless you and keep you, the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And remember, keep us in between your gas bill and electric bill. We'll pay our bills too. Thank you.